The Red Sox missed out on Jarren at the trade deadline, but could an offseason trade be worked out between these two teams?
You are Locked On MLB Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello. Happy Friday. Happy Halloween. Welcome to this special crossover edition of Locked On Red Sox and Locked On Twins on this spooky day for you all. And what's been spooky really for me is the mystery behind the Red Sox offseason and the kinds of moves that they could be making this offseason. And Jarren, a name that's obviously been popped up in discussions. I have the perfect person to talk about that with me on today's crossover episode, as well as many other things related to the Red Sox and Twins and what we're looking to see from these two teams this offseason. Brandon Warne from Locked On Twins is here with me. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Happy Halloween. It's very exciting. We live in a very Halloween-y neighborhood with little kids, so I have so much fun handing out candy to the kids and taking my own kids. So it's a fun day, but it's also a fun day to talk about some baseball.
Yeah, right. It's always so fun. When I was a kid, my dad would always take us out with all the other dads in the neighborhood, and then the moms would be at home handing out candy because my mom was like, you can go out in the cold and take the kids out, and I'll just stay inside and be in my warm house and give out candy to kids who come around.
We're the other way around, and there's this lore of the 1991 Minnesota Halloween blizzard. Now that would be before your time, even if you were from here. But look it up. It's all Minnesotans talk about is, the time it snowed and we had to wear snowsuits and stuff. Halloween is a lot of fun here, but it's when you start feeling like baseball's done and the winter, the long, cold, frigid winter is coming. So it does make you a little sad. And, we're coming up on the end of the World Series. So I guess it's just facing the facts.
Yeah, it's so true. That's when we really get into the offseason for baseball and wondering what kinds of moves teams are going to make. And we're going to be discussing a lot of different things on today's show, including the Twins hiring a new manager, what that could mean for the future of the organization, as well as other offseason needs that maybe these two teams could help each other out with. So I'm very excited to discuss all of that. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So this is something, Brandon, that I have been wondering about for a while, and that is what kind of package would it take for Jarren to be moved? Now, I know there were some discussions about him being moved at the trade deadline. He didn't actually end up getting moved, and I was particularly upset about that because I would have loved to see him in a Boston Red Sox uniform after that trade deadline, and it didn't happen. But now that it's the offseason, the discussions could open up a little bit more. So the first question that I had for you is, do you think it's realistic to expect that he could be moved this offseason?
It's such a cop-out to say I don't know. But what's tricky and what any potentially acquiring team would have to navigate is that the Twins are young everywhere else. And so adding more prospects or young players to already young pools of talent, it makes it more difficult to figure out what you have. So like you see a lot of proposals with Jarren Duran in them, or any number of the MLB ready type Red Sox prospects who they're not sure if they're going to fit them into the lineup, or if it would make more sense to now that Roman Anthony's there, you start understanding that some of the guys beneath him are a little more expendable. Well, you have to match up talent wise on a trade like that, and the Twins talent right now is in the outfield. Byron Buxton is locked in, no trade clause, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He is older than 30. So you have to ask yourself, what's fair to Byron Buxton, who has agreed to stay in Minnesota long-term? He has said over and over again, Minnesota's home, Minnesota's home, Minnesota's home. You already traded away 40% of his guys at the deadline. Now it was free agents to be in a bullpen. So it's not like it was tearing it down to the studs. I mean, it certainly looked like it down the stretch. But you have to do right by him too, and trading away one of the two legitimately good starting pitchers they have doesn't really send a good message. And if you trade Joe Ryan, what's stopping you from trading Pablo Lopez too and just saying, you know what, Byron, it's you and the babies. Let's figure this thing out. And again, he's over 30, so it's not like he's got a lot of time left as an impact player. He's had trouble staying healthy to begin with. Now, this is a long way of saying a Joe Ryan trade would probably have to be something that's too good to refuse, because they want to have those two spots in the rotation locked down so that guys like Zebby Matthews and Simeon Woods Richardson, David Festa, any of those guys that are kind of filtering in the back end of that rotation have a couple anchors at the top to follow behind. So I don't know. Right now we don't know where the Twins stand, because right after the deadline, ownership said, we're not selling. And nobody dislikes their ownership quite like the Twins fan base does. So everyone's kind of like, okay, so they're not selling. They cut payroll. They made all these trades. Cut payroll was last offseason in addition to the trades. Are they going to continue to cut? Will they put money back into the team after trading Carlos Correa, who was kind of a weird fit? What's going to happen? And there's enough big league talent to be decent in the AL Central. The AL Central is not all that crazy good right now, and the Tigers are talking about trading Tarek Skubal. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens there. So it's really comes down to, do they go get a couple bullpen arms and maybe one bat and say, listen, we can win 86 games and contend? I don't know. And that's what clouds all of this, is that the Red Sox trade chips. There's outfielders, there's certainly starting pitchers as well. And who doesn't want starting pitching? But then you've suddenly got 5 or 6 guys who are candidates for your number 5 spot. And not that that's a bad place to be, but it just means it makes evaluation a little more difficult too. So that's a long way of saying I am just like not certain what direction the Twins are going this offseason. And I want to say that I'm eager to find out, but I'm also scared.
Yeah, understandable, because they're in an interesting spot where, like you said, they could choose to go the route of, we have a lot of young players on this team, so we should try to continue to collect young talent so that we can continue to formulate this strong core for the future. Or they say, okay, we can try to be competitive in a division that is weaker than maybe some of its counterparts in the American League. So if we have a shot, then it wouldn't make any sense to send any of these guys. But my whole thing is, the Red Sox definitely need a pitcher like that. They need a number 2 starter to go behind Garrett Crochet in their rotation, because the reality is there were just too many question marks in the rotation beyond that. And they had people who overachieved in the rotation in 2025, but you can't really rely on those guys to come out and perform at that same level going into 2026. So they don't really have a definitive number 2 starter. And if there is one available via trade that they really want, Joe Ryan, if he were one of those examples, I know that the Red Sox front office wouldn't be afraid to make that kind of move. They showed that they were willing to give up top tier prospect talent to bring in Garrett Crochet and get him to come here. So I have no doubt in my mind that if a trade were to be worked out, the Red Sox would say, yes, let's do it. But I feel like on the Twins side, there might be some hesitation, because when it comes to where the Twins are at now and what their needs are, do the Red Sox have something that can benefit them? Because the outfield is the area where they have an overflow of talent. They are going to need to trade one of those young outfielders, which granted is very talented. If they trade one of those outfielders, the team that gets that outfielder is going to end up with a really good player, no doubt about it. But if the Twins don't need outfielders, what about the Red Sox could intrigue them? Do they like the idea of up and coming infield talent, or what exactly would it be that the Red Sox in particular could be intriguing to you to make this a fit from a positional standpoint? The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Well, and as I understand it, the Red Sox budget-wise, I mean, finding a number 2 starter to fit with luxury tax implications and everything, what better way than a guy who's in arbitration eligibility and is not going to make $20 million, and then you've got, Bregman's opt out, Story's got to opt in, right? Like all of this is part of the calculus and figuring out who you have left to play. And then on the Twins side of things, if you trade for, like, say, Jarren Duran, who's a young player, but not as young as maybe people think he is. I think he's 27, 28.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Does that make sense when the pitcher's about the same age and you're taking from a strength to go to a strength? Like, it's just, and then besides that, you've got a manager just hired, and I know we'll get into that, but a front office, you've got a whole structure that's kind of on thin ice after everything that happened this last season. They didn't win enough in the first half and tanked it in the second half because they traded everybody. But there was a late season slide as well the year before that kept them from the postseason. So are these guys vying for their jobs to where they're not going to feel good about trading some of these big league cornerstones that they have left? So there's that. And then on the infield side of things, like the Twins have a question mark at first base, but do they move Luke Keeschel over there, who had a tremendous rookie season when he was healthy, but got hit? And who's the soft toss? Kyle Hendricks hit him on the forearm and broke his forearm. I didn't know Kyle Hendricks threw hard enough to do that, and it waylaid his whole season. So if he can't stay healthy, because he also tore the UCL in his thumb at the end of the season, like, what do they do with him? Is he the answer at second base? The answer at short? Is it Brooks Lee? Is it somebody else? Third base, is it Royce Lewis? Is it somebody else? Like, it's just a cloud of uncertainty that makes, like, who are the Red Sox going to call an offer if not Duran? Is it Christian Campbell? I mean, I don't even know who is on that list.
Well, it's from the outfield, it would be either Jarren Duran or Wilyer Abreu, which Abreu is he was one of the most consistent bats that the Red Sox had over the last 2 seasons.
Great prospect. Yeah.
And really good defender. So that's another player with a lot of upside. Mm-hmm. Same length of control about as Duran. Duran's under team control through 2028. Abreu's through 2029. So either way, they're getting a player that would be under team control for the next few seasons. But the Red Sox, the thing with them right now is their infield situation is such a big question mark. So they might be hesitant when it comes to bringing infielders into that discussion because of the fact that they themselves don't really know what their infield is going to look like based on the Trevor Story situation, based on if they can bring Bregman back and then figuring out from there what they need in terms of an infield. So it might be hard for those two teams to come to a resolution if it comes down to the Twins saying, hey, we want infielders.
Can you clarify something for me? How do you say the password's full name?
Yeah, Joe Stinkson Garcia.
Joe Stinkson Garcia. Is it Joe Stinkson Garcia, you said?
Yes.
Okay. I've been fascinated by him as not only a prospect, but just trying to learn how to, like, I'm really particular about trying to say guys' names correctly. Yeah. And so I've seen his name in proposals too. Like, I don't know that he'd be available necessarily. Wilyer does sound like a nice piece. And then on the pitching side, is it Peyton Toll that they have too that came up? I'm not saying he is or is not available. And I know that the Red Sox have had some kind of weirdness in the rotation because, like, Lucas Giolito didn't do what they thought that he might do. And, they've had some things just not pan out. And then the one guy's Achilles blew out right at first base. I think was that against the Twins?
Tristan Casas, and then
they had a pitcher too that got hurt, right?
Yeah. So they have like several pitchers that ended up on the IL for the majority of the season. Hunter Dobbins
is what I was thinking of.
For the rest of the season. That might have actually been against the Twins, come to think of it.
I know Casas was against the Twins, and I thought Dobbins might have been. Maybe they just need to quit playing against each other.
I think it was. I think that, come to think of it, I think that might have been.
Yeah, there's been some
maybe we just can't play the Twins anymore.
There's been some high profile injuries against the Twins the last few years because Michael Brantley tore his shoulder up at Target Field, and Josh Naylor had a really bad leg injury, like a horrible, hideous leg injury when he was just coming up with the Guardians at Target Field. So the Twins do have a bit of a history of not only having their players injured, like they had Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa collide one time last year. The most expensive and colossally talent-driven collision in like Minnesota sports history, and both of them missed time. So Twins and injuries is not a fun subject to touch on whatsoever.
Yeah, maybe we should just stop playing you, and that'll resolve everything. Maybe then our players will just be healthy. But
probably a good idea.
You bring up injuries as a very, very valid point, because injuries were a big part of the Red Sox season in 2025 and going into 2026. Part of what they want to do is hope that these guys are healthy and can contribute at a high level, because Hunter Dobbins was great for the Red Sox before he got hurt. So they would see him as part of that rotation. But the problem is you're banking on guys being able to stay healthy and being able to help you. Whereas if you can trade for or sign in the offseason a sure thing, it would feel like you have a steady 1 and 2 with Crochet and Joe Ryan if he were to be the guy again. And then everybody else, then you can kind of fill people into those other roles in the rotation, with Brian Bayo likely being the 3. And then whatever happens with the 4 and the 5, you can kind of play around with guys. But the Red Sox 2026 season would have a whole new outlook in a good way if they get that number 2 starter. And things fell through between these two teams at the trade deadline. I know there were talks that the Red Sox were trying to make a late push for Joe Ryan at the deadline. Not sure what exactly halted that. I know some of the players that they wanted were current major league players, and it didn't seem like Breslow was willing to move any of those guys at the deadline. And I think that ultimately held up a trade. But now that it's the offseason, I think he would think of that differently. And it's interesting you bring up the password. He's one of my favorite players in the Red Sox organization. So much upside with him. And he kind of got called up a little prematurely, again, because of injuries and getting his shot in the majors. But I didn't think he was quite ready when he got called up. But they kind of were backed into a wall and didn't have a choice. So then they called him up. But he is definitely somebody who has a really bright future in this league. And I think he for sure is a name to keep an eye on when it comes to the trading block, because again, he's an outfield prospect that is very talented and could be an easy sell to a team, but doesn't necessarily have a spot where the Red Sox are at right now with their outfield. So if that's a name that they were to bring into the conversation, maybe that helps things a little bit in the Red Sox case.
Yeah, and don't forget, Craig Breslow is a 2-time former Twins legend, so there is some familiarity with the Twins and him too. So I think part of the thing too that happened was, I don't want to out anybody, but I think I kind of have to. Like, CBS Sports had a graphic of Joe Ryan traded that they saw somebody else posted that he had been, and it was like a fake account or like a Ken Rosenthal or whatever,
that whole thing. Yeah.
And so that popped up at like, I think the deadline was, I think it was 3 p.m. here locally, but either way, like just assume that I'm saying it was about like 3 minutes to the hour that hit. And the Athletic story that came out, a friend of mine, I think it was Dan Hayes, wrote it, was like all the Twins pitchers and a bunch of guys were huddled in this hotel room in, I know they were going to Cleveland, but I don't remember if they're in Cleveland yet. And it was just them like watching the tweets and watching everything. And like for a good 5 minutes there, Joe Ryan was like, so what's going on here? Because usually they'll let they try to tell the players, keep them up to speed, but those things also come up pretty quickly. I mean, everything has to happen in a flash. You kind of compared, the in-season trades, you have medicals, but you're not doing physicals. You have access to their records. In the offseason, it's a little different. You've got the time to say, listen, bring this guy in, or we'll go see this guy and see if his elbow checks out or his shoulder. And that's part of the thing too, where offseason trades, like I'm sure the Garrett Crochet deal, I'm sure was very complicated because of his health history. And then he goes out and just pitches a whale of a season and has, the innings count was there and everything. It's fascinating, but it also makes it tougher for people like us to be like, yeah, I feel confident that this could happen or this will happen because, we're just out here guessing for 30 minutes at a time, 5 days a week.
So there's nothing better than being at a sporting event live, watching your favorite team. And I started using Game Time for all of my ticketing needs because it truly is the best ticketing vendor. So Game Time actually shows you your view from your seat, and it's a lot cheaper than other ticketing vendors, so that when you do purchase, you know that you're at least saving money by using Game Time, because some vendors are so unrealistic with prices. So that's my favorite thing about it. And you at least know you're not going to have an obstructed view. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time as well. So it's the only ticketing vendor I use now. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. The Red Sox are in an interesting place this offseason because I think the question for them is what can get us over the hump. Now they know that they were able to make the playoffs with the young core that they have with this group because it's a lot of young players. So now it's about taking that next step of, okay, what moves do we have to make this team a true World Series contender now that we have these young players who got exposure to the postseason? So those moves indicate, a number 2 starting pitcher and adding at least one power bat, because they never really replaced what they lost with the production of Rafael Devers when they traded him. They never really replaced his bat at the trade deadline. So that's something that they're going to need this offseason as well. But their offseason, a lot of it does depend on what happens with the Bregman and Story situations. And I've talked about that pretty extensively, but there's no doubt that they need pitching. So they'll definitely push to do what they can to make a deal like that work.
Well, and what's tricky with a core in the place where the Red Sox are, like the Twins have a young bunch of guys, but they're not as established, and you still have to sort through them. When you have a young core and you're winning and trying to win, you have to be careful not to subtract the young guys that are the most important parts of that. Like obviously Roman Anthony, Ceddanne Rafaela, they're not likely to go anywhere. I mean, Roman's not going anywhere. I don't think Rafaela's either, but like, who's the number third? Like, who's the third man? Who's the fourth man? How do you make sure that you don't trade someone that's on that same track, but still is valuable enough to get you a piece that's on that track? Like, it's complicated. It gets a lot tougher than just, the sleeper accounts on Twitter posting these random trades. And you're like, who does this benefit? And a lot of times it's nobody. Like, it makes no sense at all. And so,
people don't always understand what actually goes into it. Like, it's a lot easier said than done to just say we should trade for so-and-so. There's like so much of a thought process that goes into that on both sides. Like, what can this really do to benefit us? And I do think that was a lot of the reason why at the trade deadline, Breslow didn't want to trade any of those current players that he has on the team, because he said, if we're going to make a playoff push this year, we're going to need all of these guys to be part of that. Whereas now they just have too many outfielders. There's just not room for everybody. So they kind of have to move somebody, and they're lucky enough to have a deep enough outfield to where they can get good value back for that. But it will be interesting to see if these two teams open up conversation again. And with where the Twins are at now, obviously change. You mentioned new manager who just got hired. The Red Sox have Alex Cora. There are fans who were calling for him to be fired this offseason, which is not happening. But managers take a lot of heat when things go wrong with teams, and all these fans on Twitter or social media in general are screaming like, why did the manager do this? Or he put this pitcher in, he shouldn't have done this. So everything, people resort right to the manager after a bad loss as the person to take the fall. And so with where the Twins are at now, they hired a new manager. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you think this indicates, that they feel like they're trying to establish themselves with this new identity because they're trying to compete in 2026? Or is it, more they're just trying to develop this new future for the team and they just want somebody who can start now with helping with that core?
Just like everything else with the Twins, it's entirely unclear. The kind of like parsing that I came up with was Derek Shelton was the bench coach under Rocco Baldelli, and he was on Paul Molitor's staff towards the tail end there. It's not hard to sell him on a vision that he's been a part of in the past. Whereas, Ryan Flaherty, a young guy, if you are in a position where you say, hey, this might look totally different a year from now, we might end up blowing up the front office, the rest of the roster, it's hard to sell a vision of instability for a year on someone who hasn't been in this place before. And I mean, instability from the standpoint of Derek Shelton managed the Pirates. He is very aware of instability. He's been in this clubhouse, not necessarily with these players. Byron Buxton is really the only holdover. But if everything goes sideways in a year and you say, Derek Shelton, sorry, we're going in another direction, we're firing everybody, that's a lot different than wooing away a guy like Flaherty, who's got a nice job as bench coach with the Cubs. He can kind of handpick where he goes next, but he's going to want 3 or 4 years of security, knowing he gets to implement his strategies, his staff, and everything. That's not going to be the case here. The Twins are likely going to keep mostly the same staff. So it does feel a little bit like more of the same, but this is the first time the Twins have hired a I say retread, I don't mean it in a derisive sense. Someone who's managed before. Rocco Baldelli had not managed before. Paul Molitor, Hall of Famer, but had not managed before. Ron Gardenhire, great manager, had not managed before. Tom Kelly, when they hired him in 86, was like 35 years old, had not managed before. And then it was like Billy Gardner before him, I think, had managed. They've been new managers for many, many, many years. They're changing it up and going with, and a former Twin had texted me and said, this is going to be a home run hire because he is a beast and will go to war with these guys and they're going to love playing for him. I think what they're trying to do is just go in a little different direction as far as a more blue collar type leadership, leader of men, as opposed to a Joe Maddon's thinking man type manager. And that's what Rocco was. Very chill. He's a fish fan. He's from Rhode Island. I mean, you can kind of get the vibe just from describing him. I think they want, like, from what I got to glean from Shelton from the 2 years I covered him, is like if you had Fred Flintstone managing your baseball team. Very likable guy, blue collar, and just, what you see is what you get. And I think I say this, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but he gave me kind of like the cool divorced dad energy when he would walk through the clubhouse. Like, he'd be in his flip-flops and his hoodie and shorts, and he'd have like his Oakley glasses on backwards. I mean, he gave off like a very much like, yeah, this is a guy who's been in baseball for many years and knows the deal. And it was a weird but like calming energy. And I think he's going to bring that to a young baseball team. And the problem is people think, oh, more of Rocco. He was Rocco's on his staff. There's going to be, oh, he was with the Pirates who had the similar, ownership that was not great. The team that was not great. Beautiful stadium, and nothing that goes on inside it is any good. I just think that give him a clean slate, give him a chance, and give him a team with some relievers. They need to obviously replace Joan Duran, Griffin Jacks, Louis Varland with somebody. You can't just have all kids. And maybe they are a pleasant surprise. But I don't know if that's where this team is at mentally, or if they're saying cut more, bottom out, and then build from there. To me, that doesn't make sense. But billionaires operate the way billionaires operate, and I don't understand that for many reasons.
Yeah, that's why it's tough to really imagine what they could do. That team could go in two very different directions this offseason, and you could be having two very different types of discussions about the outlook of the Twins once spring training comes around. And that's very interesting to think about. Whereas with us, with the Red Sox, it has to be, do we feel like they did enough this offseason to where they
Right.
can truly compete for an AL East title and make a World Series run? Like, do they have a chance to do that? You kind of felt like they were missing some things in 2025 and they weren't quite there yet. But now it feels like they finally showed again that they're willing to go out there and make big moves like they did last offseason. So now it's a matter of kind of rounding out that team now that all of those young players have postseason experience. And it's interesting because you have players like Marcelo Mayer and Christian Campbell who they're a little bit unsure where those guys are going to fit going into
I feel like
2026.
Meyer, nobody talks about anymore.
Yeah, he was injured, so he
That makes sense
missed the
then,
last
yeah.
couple months of the season.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with him is he does have a bit of an injury history. In 2024 and in 2025, he missed in both of those seasons the multiple months with injury. And so the question now that the Red Sox have to decide is, do we trust his ability to stay on the field?
Right.
And do we still see him as part of the future of this team? And his natural position is shortstop, but they've been having him play in different infield spots because Trevor Story was occupying shortstop. So now what's going to happen with the Trevor Story situation? And, if he opts in, then Marcelo Mayer maybe plays second base to start the season. Does he play third because Alex Bregman isn't coming back? So there's a lot of questions there with him. So I could see that potentially being a name that they think about maybe at least putting in conversation if they feel like their infield would be able to tread water without him. But the problem is they don't have enough to really confidently be able to move him.
Well, and I hate to invoke the name of Jim Bowden, but Jim Bowden had his top 50, predictions or whatever, or fits. The Twins were a fit for, it was Ryan O'Hearn, which, Twins need a first baseman, and it was a 2-year deal. It was an outfielder. Trent Grisham, which, again, 30 homers. He's a great center fielder, well, maybe now a good center fielder, but if you put him in a corner, he'd be fine. Twins don't need outfielders, but again, 2-year deal. You're not signing up for anything super long. He's not 30 yet. And then, so it was Grisham, Martinez, and O'Hearn. All of those deals were 1 or 2 years. Twins are always handing out 1 or 2 year deals unless it's Correa. And then all the relievers that were on his list were 1 or 2 year deals. That's the kind of deals that make sense to the Twins usually. And if they were to lengthen out their offense with Grisham and O'Hearn with who they have, like I see the framework of an 86 win team, which might be all it takes in a down central. The Tigers collapsing down the stretch changed the calculus so much, because if they win 98 games like they seemed like they were headed toward, and they stop talking about the unthinkable, which is trading Tarek Skubal, now they're losing Glaber, who, I mean, some might say not a huge loss, but again, a key player for them. Colt Keith is not Glaber Torres. Suddenly this division is up for grabs again, and you don't have to be the Dodgers or spend money like the Giants to keep up with the Joneses in the Central. So I hope I haven't confused your listeners or my listeners, but the Twins are a huge wild card in this offseason.
Yeah, and that's why it could be fun. Maybe we could see some surprises or some players moved that maybe we didn't necessarily think were going to be moved, because maybe that is what they're looking for. So their offseason is going to be really intriguing to follow. What does that team in particular do? Because there are teams where you feel like it's clear what they're going to be doing this offseason and what their goal is going into the offseason.
Well, and a trade with like Wilyer makes a ton of sense. Very nice player. But then you remember, they have Walker Jenkins at AAA, who's one of the top, anywhere from 5 to 25, depending on your list. And they still have Matt Wallner, who's coming off a down year, but has a career WRC plus of like 127. What do you do with him? Trevor Larnach was a first-round pick, might be on the way out, but what do you do with him? And it's so complicated. And so, like, to see those trade offers, one had Jeff McNeil coming back to the Twins for Pablo Lopez. And I'm like, Jeff McNeil is market rate for a decent middle infielder. Twins are not doing any part of that. And if they're trading Pablo, they're not bringing back equal salary at a position they're already loaded by players, not talent, like not production. They have too many infielders as it is. So it's like, I'm fascinated and scared about what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I know. You're probably in for a ride this offseason for sure. And I certainly am too, but more along the lines of I'm going to be incredibly disappointed if the Red Sox have an underwhelming offseason, given that the fact that, the Blue Jays are in their division The Yankees, a team that eliminated them in the playoffs, painful, also in their division. So, they've got to get serious if they want to compete with these teams. And we'll see what they do. But I do know that they realize that there was a very frustrating few years for Red Sox fans because they weren't a playoff team. But a lot of that was because they were trying to rebuild their farm system. And as a result, they were able to make a trade for a guy like Garrett Crochet that not necessarily every team could have done because the Red Sox had assets to offer that other teams didn't. So whether they acquire pitching via trade or free agency, they do need to bring in that true number 2 to go behind Garrett Crochet. And then that rotation will feel like it's in a lot better spot in terms of stability and not just relying on question marks to step into a number 2 role in that rotation.
Yeah, I think the mantra for Twins fans this offseason is going to have to be blessed is that person who expects nothing because then they won't be disappointed or, whatever the adage is.
Because I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make a lot of drastic moves and if fans are like, why? But a lot of it would have to do with what you said. It's because they feel like they're starting to establish a group that
figure out if Alan Roden can play and give James Outman a chance to recapture his magic from a few years ago in the with the Dodgers. Like the pieces are in place. It's just a matter of it's not 2013 when Cleet Thomas played center field for this team. It's not that dire, but the pieces got to fit and you have a limited amount of time to figure that out.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We'll have to see what happens. This has just been so fun to talk about these things and whether Joe Ryan comes to Boston or not, maybe, hopefully. It'll be interesting to have that discussion at a later date, depending on what happens with that. But either way, hopefully these organizations do what's best for them moving forward. And Red Sox fans, Alex Cora is not getting fired anytime soon. Sorry. So
neither is Derek Shelton, I guess.
Yeah. During new manager discussions, don't get any ideas. Alex Cora is a great players manager. That's something he really gets complimented on a lot. And the players love playing for him. And I think that's something that's so important that you don't really see because it's behind the scenes stuff, but he really can connect to his players. And I think that's the main reason why the Red Sox have held on to him. And that's a manager who can really control the vibes in general of the clubhouse. So, he's here for a reason. They extended him for a reason. So don't brace yourselves for new manager news anytime soon, Red Sox fans. But this has been awesome. Everybody tuning in, be sure to follow both of these shows on any podcast platform. Make sure you subscribe, including YouTube. We're here Monday through Friday discussing our favorite teams with you. You can also check out Locked On MLB with Sully, who does a great job covering pretty much everything over the course of Major League Baseball. So make sure you tune into that show as well. And, I always end my show with Go Red Sox.